A very good afternoon to all. This is Dr. Beena Gandhi Deori, Deputy Director Research, SAARC Cultural Center, Sri Lanka. I welcome you all to the first session of the SAARC Talk Series 2024, and we are very honored to have an eminent speaker amongst us, Professor Swadhin Sen from Bangladesh, as the speaker of the first talk series. Welcome, Professor Sen. And I request all our audience to mute their mic throughout the lecture, and at the end there will be a question and answer round. Before we start with the lecture, I invite Director, SAARC Cultural Center to give the welcome address. Over to you, Madam.
Good afternoon, Professor Swadhin Sen, distinguished guest. A very warm welcome to the inaugural session of the SAARC Cultural Center's monthly virtual talk series on cultural heritage and cultural diversity in the SAARC region. I am honored to stand before you as the director of the SAARC Cultural Center, and I extend my heartfelt gratitude for your presence here today. Our region, with its diverse traditions and rich cultural heritage, has been a tapestry of history, art, and resilience. The SAARC Cultural Center recognizes the importance of fostering a deeper understanding and appreciation for this cultural wealth. It is with great pleasure that we launch this talk series for the year 2024, a significant initiative aimed at exploring the resilience in cultural heritage. Today marks the beginning of an exciting journey as we explore the topic breaking the spatiotemporal boundaries of continuity and change. Thinking about the archaeology of Bangladesh with our distinguished speaker, Professor Swadhin Sen from the Department of Archaeology at Jahangirnagar University, Bangladesh. His expertise promises to provide invaluable insights into this interesting subject. I extend my sincere thanks to Professor Swadhin Sen for gracing us with his presence and sharing his wealth of knowledge on the archaeology of Bangladesh. We are truly privileged to have such an esteemed scholar with us today. I would also like to express my gratitude to all the academics, scholars, and participants who have joined us for this session. Your active participation is vital as we embark on this intellectual journey to deepen our understanding of the cultural heritage and diversity that binds us together. As we begin this talk series, let us foster an environment of open dialogue, learning, and appreciation for the diverse cultural narratives that make up the fabric of our region. I invite each one of you to actively engage in the discussions, ask questions, and contribute to the collective wisdom that will emerge from these sessions. Once again, welcome to the SAARC Cultural Center's virtual talk series. May this initiative be a beacon of enlightenment, fostering connections and understanding that transcend borders and unite us in the celebration of our shared cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your welcome speech. So this afternoon, we have Professor Swadhin Sen, an eminent archaeologist from Bangladesh. Professor Sen is currently working in the Department of Archaeology, Jahangirnagar University, Bangladesh. For his PhD, Professor Sen worked on field archaeology and geoarchaeology in present Dinajpur, Joypurhat districts in Bangladesh. He is also engaged in a number of academic projects, which is on a public archaeology, archaeology of rivers, archaeology of religion and rituals, politics of the past, and critical studies on heritage. Professor Sen has several books and articles to his credit. This afternoon, he will be speaking on a very interesting a topic that is breaking the spatiotemporal boundaries of continuity and change, thinking about archaeology of Bangladesh. So I welcome Professor Sen once again and request him to start with his presentation. Over to you, Professor Sen.
Thank you, Dr. Bina. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I would like to extend my heartiest thanks to SAARC Cultural Center for inviting me to deliver this lecture. And especially I would like to thank you, Bina, for inviting me for this lecture. I am really honored and humbled to present some of my perspectives and perceptions on the history and archaeology of Bangladesh in reference to South Asia. May I share my PowerPoint presentation? Let me start by pointing at some of the key issues that I will address in this lecture. Usually when someone is asked to present some of the archaeological or historical issues of someone's homeland or someone's country, the presentation or the discussion takes a turn to a descriptive catalog type presentation of the archaeological studies or current archaeological discoveries in that particular country or in that particular region. But I would like to take a different route for this lecture, and I am taking this route because of our work for the last 20 years in Bangladesh, especially in the northwestern part of Bangladesh as well as in the southwestern part of Bangladesh. And when we consider Bangladesh as a space, as a territory, and when we, in fact, this is not a very talked about issue in South Asian history or South Asian archaeology. Mostly, some of the historians, very eminent historians, for example, like Professor B.D. Chattopadhyaya, Rohitullah Chattopadhyaya has talked about this space-time, idea of space-time in the South Asian or the archaeology or history of the Indian subcontinent as a whole. On the other hand, in archaeology, space and time is, I think, two of the most foundational concepts for understanding and interpreting the development, the changes, and the continuity of what is called archaeological cultures or archaeological traditions or archaeological traits or characters or something like that. And we must also remember the fact that in South Asia particularly, history as a discipline is entangled to the archaeology as a discipline. Both of these disciplines came into being in this current form since the colonial period in South Asia. So these modern disciplines such as archaeology and history are closely connected in South Asian context particularly. At the same time, if we think about archaeology a little bit differently than history, then we will come to understand that in archaeology we have some different concepts and some theoretical ideas which are very different from the understanding of history, especially the pre-colonial history. Whatever we call is in different period like prehistory, proto-history or history, whatever period we assign to the past, archaeology has a different method and a different concept to address the past, and which can be distinguished from the discipline of archaeology. Both of these disciplines relies heavily on periodization, and we all familiar with periodizations. For example, in South Asia, the colonial periodization, the tripartite periodization, popularized and promoted by James Mill, became certainly the legacy. Even when his periodization of the past into three periods, for example, like this Hindu-Buddhist period or Mohammedan period and British period, was heavily religious-centric and heavily biased with Eurocentric views. And then this tripartite periodization was converted into what we are now familiar with: ancient, medieval, modern. In history, prehistory and protohistory are also included in the ancient period. So what is this periodization in history? How we define a particular period. That is how we classify time. Periodization is a form of classification of time. And at the same time, archaeology and history cannot exist without the idea of a particular space. And this particular space can be identified through different notions. It can be very modernist or presentist, like the archaeology of Bangladesh, or archaeology of India, or archaeology of Sri Lanka, or archaeology of United States of America. Whatever it is, it takes the modern territory or modern space as a point of reference. And these modern states or modern territories were not the same in the past. It continued to change. For example, if we take into account since the prehistoric time, for example, since the inception and development of the Homo species, according to these recent studies of the human evolution, that then we have to think about the space and time very differently. Because at that time, the identity of these regions or identity or names of these present territories were completely different. So in archaeology and in history, we are familiar with classifying the space into different regions, different territories, or different sub-regions, and so on. And in time also, we classify the time into different periods. The development and origin of archaeology, if we consider it during the modern period, for example, after the post-Enlightenment period of 17th century, then we will come to know that archaeology basically developed based upon the prehistory as a discipline. And the basic difference between history and prehistory is that we assume that when there are some written sources, we call it history, and when there is absence of sources, we call it prehistory. So this archaeology as a discipline developed, as has been shown by several thinkers and archaeologists like Gavin Lucas, Julian Thomas, and several other archaeologists, that archaeology developed in reference to the emphasis on particular objects. And when there was no text or there was absence of text. So this periodization of prehistory and history is a kind of classification of segregation of time. And in archaeology, also in history, and also in several other associated disciplines these days, like archaeology is very well connected to the disciplines of geology, uh, various disciplines of art sciences, various disciplines of anthropology. Everywhere we come to contact with some kind of segregation or classification of space and time. And this was my point of reference for this lecture. That's whether the way we understand and we represent space and time in South Asian archaeology can be applicable to entire South Asia as a particular region. We have to remember that South Asia as a region was a very a later development. And we can connect to these regional studies or regionalism if we consider the history of social and cultural anthropology as well as the history of social sciences. Then we come to know that it is related to the 19th century development of social sciences and 19th century development of European worldview. So there was different regions were created and constructed for the study of human societies and culture as well as the past of the human beings and as well as the past of the earth as a planet. So there is a close association, or we can call it close relationship between different disciplines in the way we differentiate the space and time in archaeology and in history, and also the way we perceive space and time in our current state of it. So how do we put the archaeology and the history of Bangladesh in this entire scheme of classification of space and time? And interestingly, in archaeology, there are several key concepts we must. Bangladesh, as we know, this is in fact what we now understand as South Asia. And interestingly, the mapping, as we now map our space, mapping is a kind of representing the space in a different way. The mapping also started after 15th century, and it was started definitely with the colonial expansion and the European expansion throughout the world. And they tried to understand the entire world with by representing the three-dimensional Earth on a flat surface by different scientific and different kinds of archaeological and geographical surveying. And in South Asia, we can put our the territory or the space we are talking about, that is Bangladesh and also part of India, present West Bengal, and it is known also as Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna Delta. And this area and the landscape of this area is characterized by many rivers. And if we consider the territoriality or the space, we can see that this is some of the satellite images. These are of these Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna Delta, as well as the northeastern part of India, some part of Myanmar or Myanmar, and also some part of the eastern part of India, present India. And I have also shown this Bay of Bengal, including the famous mangrove forest of Sundarban, to show the aerial view of or satellite view of this space, which is characterized by many rivers, water bodies, and as well as spaces, as well as ocean or sea, the Bay of Bengal. And if these are some of the maps, I was talking about how the European expansion started to represent the maps, represent the space through maps. And interestingly, if we dig deep into the ideas, then we will come to understand that a map is not necessarily the representation of a particular space. It is also a representation of a particular space in a particular moment of time. And it continues to change. If we see the maps from 16th century of South Asia or of Bengal, if we see the maps of 17th century, and if we see the maps of 19th century, we can identify the variations, we can identify the differences among them in representing the way space was perceived and represented. This is a very interesting quotation, which is very important for our lecture today, that how do we perceive space and time in the history and archaeology of South Asia, and also whether we can just narrate and found our entire narration of the history and archaeology in terms of South Asian archaeology in a homogenized or universalized form. That is, when we talk about the history of India, what does it mean? Or when do we talk about the archaeology of South Asia, what does it mean? Is there an archaeology, an homogeneous archaeology of South Asia? What are the similarities between archaeology of different regions in South Asia? For example, archaeology of Sri Lanka, archaeology of Pakistan, archaeology of Bhutan, archaeology of Nepal. All these areas are modern states. And now if we go back into time, then the idea of the territory and space continues to change. And now if we talk about the 15th century Bengal, we will identify a different region. And if we talk about, for example, 5th century C Bengal, we will talk about a different space and different time. And if we talk about prehistory of India or prehistory of South Asia, then we will come to terms with a different kinds of spatial variation of archaeological sites and historical characteristics, as well as human lifestyles. This quotation suggests that this is from a book by famous author Amitabh Ghosh, who has worked on the climate change issues recently. But this is from his experience and our experience in the Deltic region of Bangladesh. And here he talks about the transientness or the momentary existence of the space and time. This is very important for our lecture today, because when we write something or write a text on history and archaeology, we assume that the space is permanent. We assume that the space is not in a sense of flux, that is, in a sense of transientness. In different periods of time, space keeps changing, but there is a certain continuity among different space. For example, there will be certain continuity among the southern part of present India with, for example, Sri Lanka. Or there is a certain kind of continuity with present Bangladesh with the northern part of India. Or there is a certain continuity from the development of Harappan civilization to the development of the Ganges Jamuna urban phase in the early historic period. And recently, it has been pointed out by several archaeologists and historians that the idea of civilization in South Asia has to be changed. For example, we identify, for example, the Harappan civilization as the first civilization or first urbanization in South Asia. And then the second urbanization, we identify it as the Ganges Jamuna Doab. And between these two urban phases, we considered that there was a dark age or there was a blank space where there was no urban centers or there was no urbanisms. This entire assumption is based upon the established notion of evolutionary thinking and diffusionist thinking, where we think that human history took a evolutionary course, and from hunting gathering society it developed into some kind of sedentary cultivation society, and it developed into a civilization. And if we read one of the most uh, uh, released and most popular books in recent years, which is The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber, and we will come to know that this entire evolutionary scape, entire evolutionary thinking can be completely rethought. And recently, one particular paper has pointed out to this anomaly of time and space by showing that when there was urban centers in Harappan area or Harappan regions, which is also an interesting debate whether we will call it Harappan or whether we call it Indus civilization or whether we call it Sindhu Saraswati civilization. This is the politics of the space and the segregation of space which we impose on the past. But interestingly, recent discoveries is showing that we have we do, the past did not follow the pattern we assume from our modern perspectives. For example, when people were living in the urban centers, there were also people who were hunting gathering in the region, in the very close to those urban centers. People were living in some sedentary states. In evolutionary thinking, we assume that the evolutionary this ladder or the evolutionary scheme is inevitable. People or human population gradually evolved from the hunter-gatherer to farmers to pastoralists, and then they developed civilization. But this David Graeber and David Wengrow's book, and as well as some of the recent discoveries in South Asia, including in Sri Lanka, have shown that people were living in different states of life. That is very interesting. Different states of life means different times. People were living in different times according to our modern evolutionary thinking. If we consider that prehistory is a different time, prehistory is a different period, and history is a different period. But in the past, people were living in the prehistory and history at the same time. If we consider that Paleolithic period was a different period, a different notion of time, Neolithic is a different notion of time, or Mesolithic is a different notion of time, and historical period is a different notion of time. People in the past was living in these different periods or different temporalities at the same time in a very in a different in a space which we categorize as differently right now. So it seems to be a little bit complicated, but it is not that complicated if we just go beyond our presentist thinking of space and time. These are the schemes we follow usually in a linear way in history or archaeological understanding of time and space. Some space were thought to be the hub of or the cradle of the development of civilization or cradle of development of the uh, pastoralism on agriculture, and it is thought that the agriculture spread out of that particular region. But it was shown by David Graeber and David Wagner, and as well as some of the current researchers, even in the past, uh, agriculture developed in different regions in a different way. So the idea of time that we perceive, that people are living in a different state of time, and that signified some kind of inevitable evolutionary framework is being questioned. And what is all the significance of all these debates? For example, for the archaeology of Bangladesh, for the archaeology of Bengal in particular. And I have already mentioned that in archaeology, we follow some of the concept which is very different from the other disciplines like history. For example, we have to follow the idea of stratigraphy in archaeology, which can be identified as a different kind of understanding and a space of time. How the evidence of the past human activity in a particular spot or particular locality can change over the time, as well as how a particular space can be continued to be used over the time. And that can be understood through the understanding and analysis of the archaeological stratigraphy. At the same time, we use concepts like archaeological context, which is very important for understanding the idea of time and space. That is, when we find some archaeological sites or we find some archaeological materials, we think that those materials or those sites is in the same state of being since the time immemorial. But in archaeology, there is a concept, we call it the formation process of archaeological records, which give very important emphasis on this transformation and changes of the archaeological evidence and archaeological data throughout the time. And when, as archaeologists, at present, we discover, we analyze, we excavate, we collect archaeological data, and then we interpret, we must not think that the artifact or the site, what we are identifying right now, was in the same way 1000 years ago or 2000 years ago. And if we consider the space of time, scale of time from prehistory to history, then this transformation or these changes of human activity and its evidences gets more conspicuous, get more visible. And in the prehistoric studies in the recent years, for example, by Professor Robikari Sittar in India, uh, in uh, in Sri Lanka also, there are some discoveries of microliths, and those microliths have completely changed the notion of the prehistory. And they have suggested that these microliths, for example, the works of Robin Cunningham and the others in the Sri Lankan region also, we are finding that this microlith, what was earlier identified as a Mesolithic belonging to Mesolithic phase are not necessarily belonging to a particular period of time which is categorized in the established notion of prehistory. That is, microliths was used even when people were in the urban centers or people developed urbanisms. So when we think this particular tool or particular artifact represent a particular time or particular human life phase, then we are making a mistake or making an error by putting everything or every aspect of human life phase in a framework which is developmental framework. But people didn't live in the past in this developmental framework. People were sedentary, people were hunter-gatherers, people were living in the urban centers at the same time. Another important thing for Bangladesh or for Bengal to come to terms with the space, especially, sorry, uh, coming. This is a point that I would like to mention regarding the space and time on micro locality. We have excavated one site which was established as a Brahmanical temple. Then, throughout the time, it transformed its identity and also its spatial identity. And it transformed first into an habitational zone, then it was reused as part of another activity, then it was completely transformed into something else. So these, in a particular locality or particular spatial spot was continued to use. At the same time, we are finding that there were disjunctures or breaks in the way the space was used, the locality was used. And this thing we'll find in the southern part of Bangladesh, in the Deltic region. This is famous Shompur Mahabihara, the World Heritage Site of Bangladesh. Here also, what we see currently as visible monastic establishment was not the way we see it right now. It continued to change, and the Shompur Mahabihara is located on a floodplain of a river which is now known as Choto Jamuna River. And you can see on the map that the river continued to change its course, as well as in relation to the change of the courses of the rivers, the space of Shompur Mahabihara and its uses and its functions also transformed. So there is a very close relationship with the space and the activities or the architectural remains of the Shompur Mahabihara. And another important thing, I will skip these slides of Mahasthangarh, and I will come straight to the southern part. This is the southern part of Bangladesh, where the closeness because of the tides, because of the changes in the landscape of this particular region, including the mangrove forest of Sundarban, we are having a different perception of time. If you or I stay there in the Sundarban region for a long time, then we will experience the landscape and the waterscapes and the ocean in a very different way. And time is not necessarily, and space is not necessarily can be represented by some numbers, by some timelines, or by some narrations. Time and space is also very experiential. That is, it is perceptive and subjective. And our perception and our subjective relationship to time and space can be very different uh, in the, for example, in the space of Himalayan Piedmont zone. Then it can be different in the hill tracts of Chittagong. Then it can be different in the southwestern part of Bangladesh or Bengal. Then it can be completely different in the Sundarban region. And most importantly, in our understanding on space, we have put emphasis only on the land, the water, especially the water of the rivers, and especially the oceans or seas have got less attraction or less attention as the activity area of human past. So it has also been mentioned by many historians and archaeologists that archaeology and history has been very land centric. What about the people living in the ocean for a considerable period of time of a year? What about the experience of space and time of a particular sailor who is sailing on a ship, for example, in uh, 1000 years ago through Bay of Bengal, who was carrying something from Chittagong seaport to some ports of China? Or this entire idea of the ocean as subsidiary to the land is being rethought. So there are different aspects of the understanding of space and time uh, in the historical periods, and we cannot assume that time and space can be homogeneous. Time and space can be understood by certain understanding of the with the notion of center and periphery. That in history we always think that the North India or West India was the center, and this Bengal or the Sri Lanka or the southern part of India became the periphery. This differentiation or the dichotomy between center and periphery uh, is being rethought. And at the same time, if we rethought this dichotomy between center and periphery, then we have to rethought the idea of space and time and the way we narrate history in different periods in a different way, like Gupta period, Mauryan period, or even ancient medieval modern period, or by other periodization in other regions. Then we come to terms with the fact that this entire experience and narration of periods and time can be completely different in different space. It can be different in a territory which is dominated by the water. It can be different in a territory which is characterized by mountains, mountainous regions. It can be very different for the people uh, who are working, who are staying, or who are inhabiting in the ocean or waterscapes of the different regions, ports. So these are temporariness or transientness. This temporariness or transientness is not uh, given importance in archaeological and historical understanding, where we assume that there was certain kind of permanence and there was certain kind of framework that can be followed in the understanding of space and time. I would like to propose that we have to rethink this idea of space and time, in particularly in South Asia, and we have to go beyond these evolutionary schemes or diffusionist schemes, and we have to give importance to the micro scale understanding of the space and time and its transformation. And uh, especially this Sundarban area, this deltic part of Bangladesh and Bengal. And also, I would like to talk about these lifeways or the areas or regions in the Himalayan Piedmont zones. They're completely two different territories. But if we talk about these two different territories and correlate them within a particular framework, then we'll mislead and we'll just continue with the erroneous homogenization of the past space and time. So let us give emphasis to some conceptual or what is often relegated or often mocked as the theories or theoretical understanding in Indian history and archaeology. Any kind of question or any kind of conceptual discussions about archaeology and history is often mocked, often relegated as jargon or as irrelevant or as unnecessary, especially in South Asia. But we have to think beyond these contemporary current practice of us of not questioning some of the foundational or fundamental issues of the history and archaeology of South Asia. And I have tried to just point out in a very sketchy way some of the things and some of the aspects of our past which can be questioned and which can be attended to by very different gaze or by very different ways of understanding. I am not claiming that my understanding is the only understanding or my understanding is the objective way of understanding the past, but I would like to propose that this is one of the ways of addressing the space-time continuity or space-time classification and break in South Asia. And I have tried to give some example from the idea of land, idea of water, idea of the territoriality, where land became dominated, where we think about always permanence, always think about some kind of evolutionary framework where it is inevitable for the people to develop or choose or select the urban way of life or the more uh, developed way of life. This was not the case in the past, the way we are discussing now. Either people choose not to be urban, choose not to be civilized in the way civilization is defined, as David Graeber has pointed out, or they were living at the same time in the same space in different uh, segments of time, in different ways of time. They were living pastoralist life. They were living in a very hunting gathering life. They were migrating from one place to another. That is always relegated as the nomadic form of life, as subservient to the civilized way of life. But civilized way of life, the way it is discussed, was existent or was existing at the same time, at the same space where people was also living a nomadic life. And nomadic life was not the choice, not always the influence of the environment or ecology. Even people choose not to be permanently settled. They wanted to be nomadic. And they also contributed heavily in the development of human societies and culture. So the way we think of nomadism is inferior to the urbanism as a temporal uh, development, that is also being rethought by many of the people. So this is a site which was discovered by one of the very enthusiast young man, Isme Azam Rezu from Bangladesh. And interestingly, if you just look at the context of this site, we don't know about this nature of the site. The accessibility to this site is very difficult, and it is just on the coastal part of Bangladesh, and it is exposed only during the uh, recession of water after the tide. And you can look at the ocean. So when this structure, this site was being used, for example, we can tentatively date it to 8th, 9th century CE. So 1000 years ago or 1200 years ago, when people were using this particular space, what were their way of living? And at the same time, we can find, interestingly, some salt making kilns in the coastal region of Bengal, and it can be also found in the coastal region of West Bengal of India and also Orissa. So there are differences in the forms of salt making kilns, but these salt making kilns can represent our questioning of the time and space in this particular lecture. These salt making kilns depended heavily on the salt water of the Bay of Bengal. At the same time, they were being inundated or they were being underwater and exposed uh, throughout the particular year. During the rainy season, it was underwater, and during the dry season, it was exposed. So the land which we identify as the most important activity area of past human being, not land throughout the time. It was underwater for some particular period of the year, and it was also exposed for different kinds of use in another part of the year. So the space of land which is used, for example, in the dry season for agriculture, that can be used for a different purpose, for collecting or for catching fishes, or for communicating from one point to another point through boat, or that particular land can become water in the peak monsoon period, and that particular land can become inhabited for a particular period of time. And this is also visible not only in the coastal area of Bangladesh, but also in the areas where we can see big rivers like Ganges and Padma rivers, like Brahmaputra and Jamuna rivers, like Meghna rivers. And there are very interesting documentation of the people living in the chores, which is in English, we call it sandbar or mud flats. And these mud flats or sandbars are deposited by the rivers in a particular time within the riverbed. What was earlier identified as water, or it was not suitable for living of the human being, and then suddenly it became a space of living for the human being. And then they settled on this temporary land, they started cultivation with the knowledge that any day this particular land can vanish in the water. and they also use the river and the water with the for different activities like fishing, like collection of different kinds of aquatic resources, for communication, and for different kinds of activities. So if we consider, and I was just thinking about this transientness, about this impermanence of human existence, of of the landscape of Bangladesh, where people knows about this impermanence, people knows about the instability of the space, people knows about the changes in the space or the character of the space throughout the time. At the same time, they are adapting with those changes. And if we think about the past, about the archaeological evidences that we are getting from the southern part of West Bengal, India, or southern part of Bangladesh, in the deltic, active deltic part, close to the sea, then we have to think about the space-time phenomena in a different way. People stayed there, but they were aware of the impermanence. They were aware of the temporality. They are aware of the transientness of the time. So, what was the experience of time, and what was the notion of time and space for people living, for example, in the Himalayan Piedmont Plain or on the hill tracks, were completely different than the idea of space and time in the deltic part. Again, I would like to repeat, it was completely different for the people who were staying for fishing in the Bay of Bengal for 6 months of a year. So we have to think about just erasing the difference between different classes of space. We differentiate between land, between water, between sea, between mountain, between, for example, floodplain. So all these different landscapes uh, can be treated differently, and they can represent coexistence. I must point out to this particular point that coexistence of different temporality at the same times. I may sound ironic or paradoxical, but if we think about our idea of time or discourses of time and space in the writing or in the history textbooks, on the archaeological textbooks, then we can understand that the way we classify time, the way we periodize time, the way we differentiate between different areas of landscape in different territories or different spaces where was not valid, interestingly, when people were living there. They lived or they coexisted with different kinds of life, and it is not necessarily that they were bound to do that. Sometimes it was their choice, and often they interacted with each other, they closely associated with each other, interestingly, but we think at present that they were living in a different state of evolution. But on the contrary, they were living in the same state of inhabitability, same state of living, and they interacted with each other. The pastoralists interacted with the urban people. The microlith users were interacting with the urban people. The oceanic people, uh, the sailors, were interacting with the people in the land. The people living in the mountains were interacting and moving from one place to another. it is in no way that they were inferior in their life ways to the people living in the urban centers. It is in no way they were inferior to the people who we call it lived in the quote unquote civilizational centers. Civilizations, the idea of civilizations or the idea of complex society is being changed. The nomadic people was as complex as the urban people. And with the discoveries, some of the recent big discoveries in the, for example, in the Turkey, the famous discovery of the Gölbekli Tepe, uh, the famous Neolithic urban center of Çatalhöyük in Turkey. That day, there was a very interesting new discovery reported from Kazakhstan. There was discoveries in the Polynesia and Micronesia and the Asia, the oceanic world. There was discoveries from the South America. There are discoveries from Sri Lanka. We are finding different kinds of shipwrecks. So we are finding archaeological evidences from different spaces, different times, and it is just revolutionized, it is revolutionizing our thinking, and it is just making us to rethink the way we identify the space and time in a very homogenized and universalized way. So we have to rethink this evolutionary thinking, and we have to rethink our notion that people, the civilizational journey of the people was inevitable, that progress was made in terms of particular artifacts, in terms of particular life ways, or in terms of the so-called urban revolution or Neolithic revolution. It is, according to the recent archaeological evidence, this simplistic and linear notion of evolutionary narrative of time and space becoming gradually invalid and becoming gradually questionable. And I think I was not very complicated because I am always afraid that when I talk about some conceptual issues and relate the conceptual issues to the archaeology and history of our region, then it may become incomprehensible, or it may become the way I was mentioning earlier that it is identified or mocked as jargons or something like that, or it is considered as irrelevant. So I think the people who were patient enough to listen to my talk could at least realize the necessity of rethinking some of the key ideas of the ways we understand history and archaeology in South Asia. And again, I would like to thank the SAARC Cultural Center and Dr. Bina, and I would like to end my lecture with this note of thanks. Thank you.
Professor Sen, thank you very much for such a thought-provoking talk. Now the audience can ask questions or if they have any comments.
So, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah. Okay. So, I am Dr. B.N. Sarkar, formerly the superintending anthropologist of the Anthropological Survey of India. So, just first of all, I must express my sincere thanks to Professor Swadhin Sen for a brilliant and thought-provoking lecture about this breaking the spatiotemporal boundaries of continuity and changes. And he has already, in his lecture, deciphered the broad horizons of the entire, the regions of South Asia and to the Southeast Asia. And also mentioned about the different, I mean, the archaeological sites. He pointed out also one of the very important sites identified first time in Bangladesh is Masthangarh. And then the contemporary continuity we also identified from very nearer to that particular area, because that is the undivided Bengal, particularly the Chandraketu God in North 24 Parganas in India. Then Panduraja DP is another one in the Damodar River Valley. Then another one is the Moghalmari. And of late, very recently also, the Dihar is also a chalcolithic site identified by the Calcutta University from the Darkeshwar River. So if we really look into the artifacts, then we can have a real continuity of these traditions in that particular area. In this regards, I'm really very excited and came to know that at least you have been identified some of the archaeological sites in the Sundarban Delta regions. Being a student of anthropology, and particularly for the last time in the couple of decades, I'm working in the molecular anthropology, particularly try to identify the genetic footprint of that particular areas and the peopling of the different regions. So the two tools, I mean, two important disciplines, sir rightly pointed out, one is archaeology and history to decipher the past in these particular South, I mean, the Asian regions, but we also try to identify in collaborations with these archaeology and history with the molecular evidences, that is genetic footprints. And it's really very interestingly that how really is goes hand in hand in that area. In this regards, I would like to remind the very important work in that particular area, and that was by Rakhaldas Bandyopadhyay, the discoverer of the Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, I mean, the excavations in that during those period. And he clearly mentions one of the regions, that is Gongaredi regions. The Gongaredi peoples occupied the entire eastern coastals of the India, that is stretching from the Bengal to Kalinga, even to the, I mean, the Madras, now the Chennai regions, and we have a very close link between these two. So we are really grateful to know more and more about these regions, particularly the Bengal Delta regions, because these regions played a important environmental effects. If we really take into consider the pre-glacials and post-glacial period, then this Bengal glacial coastal shelf is a very important point for the human migrations. And then some of the important, I mean, the clue we can identify, even although I hope that in near future we can identify some more and more archaeological sites from that particular Gangetic regions, because in the pre-glacial periods, that was the Bengal glacial coastal shelf was occupied the early modern humans, that is the anatomically modern humans, those who came to India, as we have fairly established through our molecular evidences, that about 65,000 years ago they entered into the Chotanagpur plateau, and they also occupied in that particular the Bengal Delta regions. But immediately after these glacial periods, they have moved up, and some of the, I mean, the important true hunter-gatherers still living in Andaman Islands, particularly the Ongi, Jarwa, and they are living in that particular territory. And I had an excellent opportunity to walk among them. So I know that how really these hunter-gatherers have rightly pointed out that the hunter-gatherer peoples are still living in that particular territory, and they have their own, I mean, the heritage, their traditions, and they have the continuity with their language. So thank you, sir. You have already enlightened so many things. I'm just give some input to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shorkar, Vishwanath Shorkar. In fact, you were coming to this particular area, and I presented some of our findings in three of my earlier lectures. Most importantly, there is a team of geologists from USA. They are working in the deltic part of Bangladesh for more than 20 years. Stephen Goodfried, Michael Steckler, and several others. At the same time, some of my friends that you already know, they are also working in the the southern part of the West Bengal. For example, Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay of Calcutta University, Vishnupriya Boshak, and Kaushik is working with a very good team of scholars from an interdisciplinary perspective. And at the same time, Dr. Shurmi Chakraborty is also working there. So, unfortunately, the Bangladesh coastal part got relatively less importance earlier. We can only get some of the ideas from the seminal work of Satish Chandra Mitra in his book on Joshor Khulnar Itihash. But recently, some new works are being done, though there are limitations regarding the accessibility, regarding the finding, regarding the technological availability. Still, some of the new findings are very, very inspiring for us. For example, um, Professor Harman Kudras and his colleagues have discovered some of the salt making kilns in the coastal part of Bangladesh, and they have published a very interesting paper in Archaeological Research of India, and they have dated those salt making kilns and have shown that how these salt making kilns changed their shapes and function over the time. The earliest of the kilns were dated to 8th, 9th century CE. So these are these works are being done, and at the same time, the Department of Archaeology of Government of Bangladesh started to work in the Sundarban and the region in the vicinity. I was fortunate enough to work with some of them in that area, and some of the findings are very, 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 very thought-provoking. And interestingly, some of the findings are also just in a way challenges our taken for granted idea about those particular areas. That is what I was we tried to, along with one of our colleagues from the Department of Archaeology, we presented a very long lecture on this kind of finding. For example, we have found different kinds of uh, shrines or religious architecture, which is very different than the remains in the northern part of Bangladesh, and which is similar to the findings of Professor Durga Basu in the Kankondegi excavation. And we have found, they have found basically the Department of Archaeology, a Buddhist monastery in the tidal zone of Bangladesh. And there are several several structural architectural remains within the Sundarban. Unfortunately, it is not possible for us right now to conduct archaeological investigation because of the accessibility issues and the lack of funding. But thank you again that that particular area is very interesting to question some of the historical and archaeological understanding which is based on the other parts of Indian subcontinent.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any other input or any more questions?
Yeah, there is a question from Daya Disanayake, Dr. Daya Disanayake. Dear Professor Sen, this is one of the best SAARC lectures I have attended. It is a real eye-opener for those who try to monopolize sacred spaces. Let's hope we could have full confidence that. And then I have, yeah, there is one question from Ramesh Gauri Raghavan.
That
Yeah.
is a very interesting question.
May I ask Professor Sen if we can talk of the challenges of conducting excavations in delta sites where flooding is unpredictable?
In fact, I was present in as a consultant, honorary consultant, because of two excavations in the deltic part of Bangladesh. one who is known as an habitational site of medieval period, particularly, and it is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of the historic mosque city of Bagherhat. There was a excavation there, and I was also present in the excavation of this monastery I was talking about. Both of them are located in the tidal zone, and in some cases the flooding is very predictable. It is not unpredictable, but it is unpredictable the way when it occurs, the flooding occurs as a consequence of the other catastrophic events like a cyclone. Embankments and construction of barrages, and that also in a way to instead of protecting the land from the flood, it accentuate flood. The problem is basically with the surge of the groundwater, and we cannot deal with those problems very easily. In that zone, if you dig just 1 meter, then even in the dry season, water will start to come out. And we don't know how to deal with those waters. And the other problem is definitely the accessibility to some of those sites, which are, for example, within the Sundarban, or which are sometimes underwater and sometimes partially exposed, like the site I have shown you. Because of the tide, some sites can be submerged for a particular time of the day, and some sites can be exposed for only 1 hour in a day. So it is not possible to conduct archaeological excavation the way we do in other parts of the delta. So I don't know how to deal with this. Probably some geophysical methods or some remote sensing methods will be more effective in recording and understanding the spatial extent of those structures, and dating of some of the materials, if it is found, could be very, very helpful. But we have to rethink our excavation methods, or also the survey methods and investigation methods for this part of the delta. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meena. Thank you, sir, for such an enlightening talk. We really enjoyed, and particularly very necessary in the way that we have been perceiving continuity in case of archaeological as well as historical research. I'll keep the question short. I have this interest to understand, you had discussed, or you just gave a small line about the Paharpur site and how it has been also looked at from a very static temporal viewpoint. In your work also you have mentioned that there are possibilities of multiple construction and reconstruction. So how Paharpur and the possible destruction of other Buddhist monasteries have been seen in different parts of India and Bangladesh by the Turkish army and all. So breaking that kind of already hypothetical assumptions, would you prefer to look more into the geomorphology of Buddhist monasteries, and particularly how they are located using a kind of elevated zone between river bodies, and their activities or expansions with the other population bases also are very much related with the geology and geomorphology rather than looking into that? If you can kindly share a bit more about Paharpur, just for my own interest.
Thank you, Dr. Ilora. It is not only Shompur Mahabihara or Paharpur. There are several other small Buddhist monasteries. I prefer not to use the term monastery. I prefer, because there was differentiation in the categorization of Mahabihara, Bihara, Biharikas. So translating all these types of archaeological structural remains under an umbrella term like monastery could be misleading. Still, Shompur Mahavihara definitely got traction from the people around the world because of its enormous size, as well as for his central temple and many other artistic aspects, not because of the complete complexity of the way it was transformed. So these discourse of the destruction of all the Buddhist monasteries by the Turkish invading army is completely misleading according to our research in the Bangladesh. Rather, in different parts, different establishments, whether it is Buddhist or whether it is Brahmanical, whether it is Muslim, they also continued with particular kind of pattern, but we cannot just homogenize the way they were abandoned or the way they were, I think, lost their significance. Even Paharpur continued to be used even in the 14th, 15th century as far as the stratigraphy and the material culture is concerned. And at the same time, if we consider the other smaller monasteries, which are not very well discussed in the literature, then we will find that different factors affected their sustainability, their developments, as well as their abandonment. It is not a single factor or single event or a single process that affected the abandonment and transformation of the Buddhist monastic and other establishment. Not only monastic, we have also excavated some shrines or temples which are very isolated and not associated with monasteries. And they were also transformed. So I do not think that a single factor or a single event can be attributed for the abandonment and transformation of religious establishments in Bengal or in Bangladesh. And as you have mentioned that we have to think about giving emphasis to other factors. For example, as you have mentioned, like the geomorphology and especially the fluvial geomorphological context. And also, we have recently written a paper with the mention of giving emphasis to the paleoclimate, especially the variation of monsoon and its relationship to flood and its relationship to the agrarian development, as well as we have identified some of the signatures of the effects of earthquakes and collapse of many of the architectural edifices during the period between 6th and 9th centuries. So in that way, I would like to propose that a multiple purpose or a multiple process oriented understanding is required for addressing the issue of this transformation of the religious edifices. A singular factor oriented or singular process oriented narration or interpretation could be very dangerous as well as could be very biased.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.